So the app that will be the final part of your project. Here you have Angular or your front end, and in the back end you have Node.js. So you can control everything by having CRUD operations, so that you can have create, read, update, delete. So, okay, so you just have these calls, and in the end you've got your controller, which is in Node, or for example here you have it in Spring to be in Java, as you already studied. So here in the project with Angular, what you will do is in fact to manage tutorials, where each and every tutorial is characterized by an ID. You've got a title, a description, a status, and you want to create them, you want to get commands, then you will want to update all the records, as well as you would like to delete some of them. And maybe also want to search according to their title. So in fact, this is when you use Angular. This is the latest one, the 13th version. Then you have everything written in TypeScript. So in fact, all your TypeScript files, they will be compiled and transformed into JavaScript. So if you have your JavaScript code, it will be already analyzed. Then you also have the reactive programming, such that it has observables. And in this call, so you have it as a pattern. So whatever changes, you will have a callback, meaning that it is like here, you've got your parent function somewhere in time, and this one, you will have a callback function. So somewhere in time, you can also have a callback function, which will retrieve the result. You can remember which is the difference between a synchronous and an asynchronous call. When you have it synchronous, in fact, process A, which will call process B, it will be in a wait state until it receives the result from process B. While when being in asynchronous mode, process A will continue working after calling process B, and then somewhere in time, it will get the response. Then your CRUD operations will be like this. You have your front end, and based on your front end, you will have some routes, the routes which you will call like here. So it will be when you will call a certain tutorial based on the ID, and this means that this one will exist as a component. So you have these as components, meaning that they are like your classes in Java, and you want them to be to encapsulate as more as possible. And this means that you have a high cohesion and low coupling, such that all the details in order to add tutorial, you place them here, and you don't mix the components between them as functionality. As well as you don't want them to depend one on the functionality of another one. So you need to maintain a low coupling. Okay, so you will want to retrieve a tutorial based on the ID. You can retrieve all your tutorials, so you obtain a tutorial list, as well as you can add a certain tutorial. Having them as components, you will have to provide them also as services, such that you will have your HTTP client that will also have the backend, and from the backend, it will retrieve the output. You will have a request, and then you will have a response. Okay, so based on what you call, based on tutorials, in fact, you will do a get, and the controller will do the get. So it will subscribe to a service, and then you will have the response to it, and you will have to display it. So in fact, the rest commands that you will have are in fact post. So post is when you want to create a new instance of tutorial. Then you can have a get of tutorials to retrieve all of them, the tutorials that exist. And your database will be of type NoSQL. So it isn't relational. You just have each and every record as a JSON. Then you have the get according to tutorials ID. You can also do a put. So put is when you update a tutorial according to the ID on which it is defined. So even in a non-relational database, you still have the ID of each and every record. Also, you have the delete. So you can delete according to a certain ID, as well as you can also delete everything, no matter the ID. And even you can do the get. So when you do the get, you will have the part where for a certain tutorial, so in fact here it will look out of the whole list. It looks through all tutorials and it will retrieve the one that contains the title based on the values that you provide. So let's see. This is when you will have firstly to download the latest version of Angular. So you will find it on web and you will have to use npm. So this is another package that you will have to install. This is when you can have many other packages that you can install, and by having this -g you install it globally for your system. Then you also use Node, okay, and you will have the version. So this is the latest one with 16.13.1, as well as you will have to check inside the terminal which will be your version. You have Angular, then you have a Node, you have the package manager, so this npm, and after that you will have also your kits. So whether they are not updated, you will also have the ng from Angular. You do the update of what? Of a development kit. This is the beginning. And then it will, if you do it for a build, it will also update the CLI schematics. So it will do it. And if you also have a GitHub project, so maybe you also want to, sorry, maybe you did use it or you did see it, then you will have this minus allow dirty. Okay. If you want to create a new terminal, you will have to go to terminal and then you will have a new terminal window, after which you will have the part with creating a new project. So when you want to create a new project in Angular, you have the ng new, ng from Angular, new, and then you've got the name of your project. Then you will want to type here that yes, you use routing, so you will have it included, and you will have to use CSS as format. As you can see, you have multiple formats like CSS, SES, LESS, stylus. As you can see, this form with SCSS, in fact, you have it as a superclass. This is when it's a sort of Java, you have the curly braces, semicolons, and you include each and every element. And then as a review, you see here that you have the part with borders, with paddings, and this means that for each and every element, you first have the content. After the content, you've got the padding, which is transparent. So it is like here. You've got a certain content. Then you have the padding, which you have it here of 50 pixels. Then you have the border. The border is visible, and you will have it, for example, here, 15 pixels as being a solid green, and it's all around. And then you've also got the margins. It's again transparent, and it's all around. So like here, you've got the margin of 20 pixels. This is just to recall the parts of your web programming of last year. Then you also have SES. This is another option. This is when you also have it indented and you don't use anymore the curly braces. So as you can see, compared to the previous example, here you are having the braces. Okay, while in this language you don't use them anymore. So this is just to say as an example how it looks like. Then you also have less. So less is in fact you have it as being compatible with CSS. So in fact you will also have everything compiled and it will use a JavaScript tool such that it will convert everything again inside CSS. So whatever you write here as a variable, for example, width will be of 10 pixels. Maybe you want height to be the width plus 10 pixels, so be 10, I mean 10 with 20. Okay, you can write it in this way. And it will be simply analyzed. But for this example, you have it with CSS. And also stylus is when, again, it is dynamic, and it will also be simply compiled and transformed into a CSS when you have it defined in this way. Okay. But being in CSS, you can have it simply transformed, existing in this way. Exactly like here, with body, you have the fonts, where you have values, you put it like here between quotes, and you set each and everything. Okay. So we will stick to CSS. And then we continue by having your components and services. So in fact, as a review, you have the part with your app, you have routers such that you can access each and every route, whether it's a tutorial based on the ID or the tutorials or to add a tutorial. And then you have a component for the functionality which you provide as a service. And in order to be stored inside your database, you will have a request towards your control, okay, which is in fact your backend. So here you will have those three components, such that you will have this ngc, you have C for on component, and you store it inside components, tutorial add, as well as you have the tutorial details and the tutorial list. What you also do is to define a model for your tutorial, and this one will simply be linked with your backend. So you will manage tutorials, and this is why you have the class for your model. Then you offer all of it as being services. So you have this NGS, and you have your services. And then you see that you will have connected, you will have all these files. You have under models, you have tutorials. Then as you can see, you have your components. So whatever you add here, you will enter, as you can see, go inside your project. So for example, it's Angular CRUD. And when you have this command, it will also create a folder components. And inside components that exist under app, you will have your three components. And then you also have your routing, which exists inside your app minus routing module. And you also need to define inside app.module.ts everything that you need to import. Here, when you have already the call for each and every component, they already exist as being imported inside your app.module.ts file. Let's see to what I refer. When you have your app.module, open it here in Visual Studio Code. You have the part Angular CRUD. Let's see. Part Angular CRUD, you have it inside src. And inside app.module.ts, okay, you see that you have the module according to Angular. Then you have it the one for the browser. You will have to include how to do the routing between the pages. Also, you have multiple components. The one by default with app, so app exists by default and you can include it. You also have the tutorial components such that you can manage each and every instance of tutorial. So in fact here, as you can see, you reference the TypeScript. So whatever component you create, you will see that you've got the part with the CSS. You have the page, the HTML page. Specs is for testing. Okay, it is done by default. You can also do it in a similar manner. Maybe you want to manage some arrays or some instances and you want to see whether they are retrieved. And here you also have your TypeScript. So when you will call it inside your page with HTML, whether it's from outside from app, you will have this app minus tutorial. And this is how you will identify, as well as you see it as being associated to your HTML and CSS. Right, so first of all, let's inside app.module.ts. You add the par with component. Okay, so it will be this one with a TS. In fact, it knows the TypeScript. Then you have also the list, so you have all of these components, a tutorial, get tutorial list, the tutorial details. Then you will also have a form, so you import it from Angular. You will have a code with your HTTP client, and you can also add other components. So no matter the component that you add, it will be included by default inside app module.ts. So here is when inside declarations you've got all your components and the imports from Angular, they are added here as being the part with the browser, as doing the routing between pages, analyzing your forms, and even your HTTP client will have the request towards the backend and receive the results. And this is what you have over here. Then this is the part, okay, when these were added with the form, with the HTTP model, as well as you see them as existing above, but you also do the routing. So don't worry, because all of these files, you already have them placed on Moodle, as well as the part with your backend. And here, inside the browser, I will want to access all these components, so you need to import them. Then, whether you have your link and nothing follows, it will simply redirect you to tutorials to see each and every tutorial by calling the component with tutorial list. Then you also have the tutorials ID. And you do the match according to the whole path, so whether you do write it completely. Then based on the ID, whether the ID exists, you will have the tutorial details component. So for a certain tutorial, you see each and every attribute that is associated to one tutorial. You've also have the add component to add a new tutorial inside of your database. And even here, you say that the router module of your Angular application, you use the routes that you previously defined, and you make it available, so you didn't have to export it. And this is the content, whether you have to copy, paste, or modify. And now, inside your index.html, index.html is in fact the app that gets loaded by default, and you will include Bootstrap here inside the head. So you will have here your doc type of HTML, you have the beginning label, then you have the header. Everything will be interpreted using the meta of UTF-8 to see the whole content and to recognize the letters. Then you name the app as being an Angular CRUD, and by default you have it inside route. Then you have an icon. This is just for the tab when you open it to appear under this name. And inside it, you see that inside the body, you call another component. So this is in fact your app component. And as you can see, it is defined by app minus route. So index.html calls this app minus route, where app minus route is linked to the app component.ts. You have the selector with app route, which is associated to the components HTML and CSS. So as you can see, even here inside the app.component.html, it has the navbar with Angular app. You have a tutorial icon with tutorials, and it will do what? It will have a router and take you to the page of tutorials, as well as you can have the ad, which again will take you to add, while the result exists inside this router minus outlet. And tutorials and add, they are inside routing, and you can see it over here. We have them defined as path. Okay. So this is what you've seen inside the component HTML. And now it is the fact that I need to use a simple model. The model will be this tutorial, And inside tutorial, so each and every instance that I store is characterized by an ID. I've got the title, I've got a description, and whether or not it is published. So these are the attributes of your tutorial. Then I want to have the service for it. So you've seen it as existing over here. I have the tutorial, and inside tutorial, you will have to have, based on it, the service which is defined. The service is in fact that by default, when I will have a call, it will look at this backend with HTTP localhost. This localhost is at 127.0.0.1 at port 8080, and based on tutorials, I will have the calls towards my backend, such that I have my get all. In fact, it will be an HTTP request of type get, and the result will be of multiple tutorials. So based on the observable pattern and the URL, you retrieve your tutorials. You can also get a tutorial based on the ID. So according to the base URL, you have a slash of ID. And again, you do a get. When you want to create, you have a post command for your backend according to your database as well as the data inside the form. You can also update based on the ID, meaning that you have a put request based on your base URL. And then you simply retrieve and you simply send also the data that you want to update for your certain record according to the ID. You can also delete based on the ID. So it's again an HTTP delete based on, so this is a quote at 45 degrees, so placed under ask, and you identify it based on your base URL and the ID that you want to delete. Then you also have the delete, no matter which is the ID, as well as you can find by title. So in fact, you have what? You have a get request. You can get multiple tutorials. So this is why you've got a tutorial array. And based on your base URL, you search according to a certain title. And these are the services that need to be also provided by your controller, which is in Spring. And you have them one by one, exactly what I specified. Then what you also have is to add a tutorial. So when you want to add a tutorial, it means that you have this component name with f minus add tutorial. First of all, your instance of tutorial is empty. So don't forget that you also need to import it from your models, and you have your tutorial model. As you can see, this one with yes. So being empty, it has no title, no description, as well as published is false. And it's not sent yet. And then you have the default constructor. Also, so after the constructor is, we'll call the Angular on init. And now you have your two functions. So such that on submit, you will have to save the tutorial and you create this constant, this const of type data, such that you can have a title according to what is linked. So you have a binding with the frontend, and you take for the tutorial that title and your description. Okay. As well as it means that inside tutorial service, you will have to have a create. So in fact, you call the service with create, and then subscribe means that you will receive from your controller the result. You can also see it inside your console, and you will have the submitted value as being true. If you have a new tutorial, again, submitted will be false, and all the fields of tutorial, whether it's title, description, and published, they will be these two empty, and published will be false. Now, let's see in fact how it looks like. You have your HTML page. And inside your HTML page, you will have the title. And title, as you can see, you have it binded to your model of tutorial. So you will say, okay, I have my value, my input value with the ID title, and this one will be linked to my model according to the attribute title of my tutorial. The same is done for description. You have it also linked to your tutorial, and this is how you have it. So it will be stored inside tutorial. Then whether I have the submit button, I have it with this click action. Okay, so like in Java, you have on click events, on selected, and so on, meaning that you will call the save tutorial method. So in fact, it will have this part, and you will have the save tutorial. Also, you see it here that you have this part will appear. So this div will appear whether your record was not submitted. Okay, so whether you did not submit a new record of type title, then you see it. Whether you did submit, being the result of save tutorial, like from here, as you can see, this was submitted is true. Whether the service simply added the record, and whether it was added, you will have this message that your tutorial was added successfully. And for your button, it means that again, it will simply have everything empty once more. So you will have a brand new tutorial which is empty, whether you do want to fill it again. So everything to be like where? Like this part where you initialize everything, and then you had a constructor and the on it. Okay, so, and this test file, this exists by default, as well as you can add your CSS for the way in which it looks. So here you have the add, this is the part with the HTML page, your CSS. And then you can also have the tutorial list to see each and every tutorial. Again, it is characterized by a name. This app minus tutorial list. You have it linked to your HTML page and CSS. And what I will want to do, in fact, is to see each and every instance of my type, which is tutorial. Over here, I will have an input, so you can search by title. And as you can see, we have this ng model of title, such that you will have a new method, which will be search title. Search title that exists over here, and it is defined. So in fact, it will call the backend tutorial service. It will test by title, and you will fill up all the tutorials that you have according to the title based on which you did the search. You can also have all your tutorial list, meaning that you will have this ng4. ng4 is in order to go through each and every record of tutorials. You have a let, this is like for tutorial, and then you have 2 dots of tutorials. You've got the index, and based on the index, you can select it. So it will be your current index, and it will be the one that will appear, such that you will see what? You will see tutorial title, according to the instance which is active, and you can also have a button to remove all your tutorials. So you have this click, and it will call the method remove all tutorials, which is also to the right. You will see the details of your current tutorial. So in order to see the details, you have another component which is called. So as you can see, this app minus tutorial details exists inside the TypeScript, and you have it as your select. So this is how you link them. You have exactly these labels, and you will have exactly based on which you show. So it will be based on current tutorial. Now, going to the tutorial list, let's see what we've got. We've got a series of tutorials because I want to display them, and it will be empty by default. I will have my current tutorial empty. Also, I have my current index, so it's neither of them. It is -1, and no title, because this is the one that is shown whether I do select one of them. So it will be here. Then I have my constructor, it's empty, and on init, what do I do? When I want to initialize, I want to get all my tutorials. meaning that I will have a new function. Here I can have multiple functions and they can be called multiple times. So this is when you have just the function call towards retrieve tutorials, and I will have a get all. Based on my get, I retrieve all my data, and here for this tutorials, I will initialize it with the data that I have it inside my backend, inside my NoSQL database. You can also view it inside the console. Also, if you have an error, it will be displayed. Whether you want to do the refresh, what it will do? Again, it will retrieve all tutorials and neither of them will be selected, meaning that the current tutorial is empty and the current index is -1. Whether you want to have current active tutorial, it means that if you clicked on one, the current tutorial is the one on which you did click. So you do the binding between the front end and your TypeScript, as well as you have your current index according to your list. And here, like in Java, you start counting from position 0. Then if you want to remove, it means that you will have a call towards your backend, your tutorial service, and you want to delete everything, meaning that you have a call towards your controller, you have your result, and then what you need to do is to refresh the whole list. And maybe you have an error, so you need to display. If you want to search according to title, you have your current tutorial, which is empty. Your current index is -1. And inside tutorial service, you will have to search according to your title. So you have to search according to this title by doing the binding that you do here. Okay, according to ng model, it is title. So here, when I want to search according to it, it's according to this title. You do the subscribe such that you have this call, such that you will perform a get. Based on a get, you will have a collection, an array, in fact, of tutorials. You store it, and you can also display. So everything will be passed in JSON, okay, which is JavaScript format, and you have each and every type of an instance. Now, you see here that you also have a tutorial details. So for my tutorial details, what I want to see is the tutorial's title. So here it is whether you have an ID for your current tutorial. You can see the details of tutorial if you know its ID. Such that over here you've got title. Title, I receive it from my current tutorial, the title. Then I link description to what? I have these double braces with your current tutorial, the description. The status, it is whether tutorial published is true, it will say published. Whether it's false, it will say pending. Then you can also have a router link, and here you can go to a certain tutorial based on its ID, according to which you can do the edit. And whether you do not have a current tutorial, it will simply display that you need to click on one of those. And now this is the one which you have it as editable, and you link it towards title, towards description, and with your status. And this is how you can see it. And similarly, you have your HTML, you have your CSS linked to it. Then, by default, you see that you have this metadata for it. It will be your input for your current tutorial, according to what was selected inside your tutorial list. So this is why here, when I have my app details, it's according to my current tutorial, which will represent, in fact, the input that I've got. And your current tutorial will have an empty title, no description, okay, and published will be false, and no message associated. Then, inside the constructor, I have my service, I have my routes for it, and in the onInit, I will have to get a tutorial according to the ID that was selected in the route. If I do the get, I will have to have a request towards my backend. So I need to call my tutorial service. I need to have a get call according to the ID. I retrieve the data, and this data will exist here inside your current tutorial. And whether it's not the case, you will receive an error. Then you can also update it. So whether I want to modify some fields, okay, this is the one when you have it editable. So this is why you've got all this part. This part with the editable is whether you have an ID for your current tutorial and you have it linked. As you can see, you have the title linked to your current tutorial, you have your description linked to it, and your status. As well as you have several options to add here to unpublish it or to publish it. So as you can see, this is based on the value of current that published. Okay, so whether this one is true, you can unpublish it such that you have the call with update publish false. Whether it's the opposite case, you have to add it according to a true value. What you can do is also to delete it, and you can even update it. So you have the update call and you have the message as an output whether or not it was successful. Then whether you do not have a current tutorial ID, will say that you cannot access it. Such that, let's see, over here you can update it. So based on what you have for your current tutorial, so you do the binding with your front end. Here in your front end, you have them one by one. You have title based on current tutorial title on the ng model, as well as you got your description, and this one with published. So this is binded and exists over here. Then you can do an update. When I have an update, I will have a put command that I will have. So put request, which will be done for your controller. And you retrieve here whether or not published has a certain status, and you will have a message whether it was successful, okay, as well as maybe you will have the error if it crashes. So let's say the service is not available anymore. Okay, and when updating it, you have it according to the ID and your current tutorial, as well as what you can do is to delete it, and this one will do it, as well as it will take you to the route that starts at tutorials. Okay, so in fact, you have your service. Okay, this is for your backend, while the routing with tutorials, it will take you to your tutorial list component. This is what each and every component has. This is the content of tutorial list, tutorial details, what I said already. Okay, this being part by part to see it. All right, and now you have the calls. As you've seen, you need to have the call in the backend for your CRUD operations, so create, read, update, delete of each and every tutorial. And in this case, you will have to use Spring Boot. You can have this website where you can have a new Maven project. So Maven project is when you've got an XML, from XML, such that for your project, you can add some packages, which according to their version, they will be imported. Then you have Maven with the language inside Java. And what I did use for this tutorial was Java 8. And then you have the part with generate. And inside the IntelliJ community, you will have the part with POM. Here at the end being exactly the dependencies which you've got for your project. Such that when you load it, such that I have it over here. I have my font, and for the project, I see here in dependencies exactly what I need to use. Okay, being exactly these ones. Okay, so it will load. Finish loading. So what you will use is in fact the boot starter, you have the test, you have the starter web, and you've also got your MongoDB. Then what you will have to do, you will have an icon which will appear here, so that you need to import everything, and these ones will be installed for you. And whether you do want to add some new ones, like this one with web, you simply paste it, and you will have again a warning like this one, such that it will be installed for you. Then you also have your link towards your MongoDB. MongoDB, it's your NoSQL database in Angular, and it works by default on the port is 27017. Then for it, you will also have the binding way tutorial. So whatever you store inside MongoDB, as you can see, you link it to MongoDB documents. It will be stored inside a collection called tutorials, and you will have for each and every tutorial. This one exists here. We have a model, and inside it, you see that for a tutorial, you have a document to do the binding with your NoSQL database. Then you have the ID for your record. You have title, description, and whether it's published. And the rest, you simply go to generate. You have getters and setters. You have the empty constructor as well as the one with the fields. Okay, and the toString. So all of these you define, you can add by going to general. And this is like a Java class. And then you will have your repositories. And in fact, with this repository, you will have to extend the Mongo repository. So here it is just the interface, and the interface here will provide you the methods that you will have to implement. So it means that you do the binding, you have a MongoDB repository, you will extend it, and you will want to say how do you want to search according to a tutorial title, as well as you want to find all your tutorials which were published. Okay. And in this case, what you will see here is in fact that for your REST at controller, you have this cross origin, so that you can allow to have a call from outside, or for example from the front end. Then you also have the controller for your REST. You also do the mapping, so you have the request to API, so that this one will be called as you've seen over here inside the part with your services. Okay, so it will be services, you have it here, and this is exactly what you call. You call it with API tutorials, you need to make it available, and this is when you do the mapping. As well as you have the auto wire, such that your repository will have what? You have a bean, you have a Java bean, or the instance of tutorial, and you will have to persist it inside your database. So meaning that your controller, which is this one, okay, it means that all the requests that I get are from my front end that will run on the port 8080. And I do the mapping. As you've seen before, I want to call it with this API. Okay, with API. Then for this API, I link it to my repository. After that, you see that you have this get of what? Get of tutorials. So you have this API tutorials, and when you have this call, in fact, it will have exactly this code. So when you have the API of get tutorials, it needs to create a new array list of tutorials, as well as you need to check. So whether you don't have any title, it means that you will need to find all the records that you need to add inside your tutorials array. If the title exists, then you have a new message when you do have this find by title, whether it contains. And this one already is linked. So this tutorial repository is the one that you defined before according to the interface, but it extends the MongoDB repository, so this is why you can use its functions. Then you can search according to a title, and everything goes inside tutorials. Also, if tutorials is empty, then you have no content. If not, you simply retrieve it. Or maybe you also have an exception, so again, it needs to appear. Similarly, you need to have the get according to tutorials ID. You will have to have this option where you have the tutorial repository you find by ID. And whether it exists, you retrieve it. If not, again, you will have an error saying that you didn't find your resource. You can also have a post. Post meaning that you will have to save a certain tutorial. So you will save what? You will save a new instance of tutorial according to a title, a description, and whether it's published or not. And in the end, you will say that it is created. If not, again, you have an internal server error. Then you have the part with the ID for put. Put meaning that you create a new instance of type tutorial according to what you've got inside data that is sent by this one. You have a put, so it means that you have an update. Update of ID, update of ID is according to my details, meaning that I have a title, a description. So in fact, it looks inside the data that I sent. So you will have a new instance of tutorial where you set the title, you set your description, whether it is published, and then you will have requests such that based on the tutorial being, you will have to link it, and the backend, in fact, here it will do the link with your MongoDB, and it will simply have to do the put. If it doesn't exist based on the ID, then again you have a not found answer. You can also delete. Whether you want to delete based on the ID, you have this delete by ID inside Mongo, and you don't have any content. Again, you have the part with error whether it doesn't exist. You can delete all the records that exist. We delete all. You can also get those which were published. So you will have this tutorial repository if your find by repository published is true, as well as with your tutorials, or whether it's empty, you don't have any content. Okay. So, let's see over here. This is your controller, the one that I presented, and then you have your testing. So the testing, which will be done by running here your tutorial application. Click on this one with run. Okay, here it is the one, and I have my project with CRUD, and I have this ng serve of minus port 8081. So this one will start. As you can see, I have my Spring Boot, got the version, and this is also linked. You have Tomcat as your web server, and it is linked on your port 8080, as well as you got your database, which is an NoSQL one working on 27017. So here, as you can see, you can have simply a record. You can have a post inside Postman. So Postman you can download and you can install it such that you can test your calls. So for example, here it is when I have my tutorials. Okay, so that on my tutorials I can have a post for it. And for post, you go inside the body. I will have to post inside API tutorials. Here we have row. Then the type will be of type JSON. And keep in mind that from here I have my call, the type of the call I can have. It is post, and I want to store Java with object-oriented programming. Such that when I send it, you see that by default it provides an ID, and published will be false. You can also have, for example, a get of all your tutorials. So you simply change it from here. as well as based on a certain ID, you can also delete it, or you can delete all of them. So like here, I can press on delete and everything was deleted. And that when I call again the get, nothing will be retrieved. But if I do again the post according to body, okay, if I do again get, it exists. And what I can also see, okay, so this is according to when I want to create it. Then I have the get, and get doesn't depend on body, it doesn't analyze it. So this is what was inserted before in mathematics and calculus. As long as you see that you have this cross origin. So cross origin, you have it here at the beginning of your control tutorial. You see that you can get requests from your localhost 8081. And this is why here I did run my front end using 8081, such that when I have my service and I send a request towards my localhost 8080, this is exactly the service that runs here using my Tomcat, okay, on port 8081. So this is how I bind the backend with the front end. Okay, such that you have this one localhost, it works on 8081. Okay, see exactly what I did add the Java with object-oriented programming. And what I can do is also to edit it. Sorry, true, and I want to update. I go here to tutorials, I go over here and it was updated. I can also modify the status to be, let's say, published. Okay, it was updated. I can go here and indeed the status changed. Okay, so as you can see, you have this component with listing the tutorials, which is done with search, and this is the component with your details, okay, which will take you over here. And you can also have the delete. And then you can also add tutorials. Let's say it's mathematics, algebra, for example. I submit it. I can return to this page and everything is empty again, but I can also visualize it here. Let's say that I'm having Java middle B. I'm here and I want to search according to mathematics. So as you can see, it will display it and I can visualize it. As well as I can remove it, okay, and it will simply do what? It will remove all my records. This is basically what this app is doing. And you have here exactly what I did show you. And all the requests, you can have this all. I have my inspect based on my network and whatever I do and add. Okay. Here, as you can see, you didn't have the part with the method. It is when I do the post and I want to store it, and it will be posted according to my content of type JSON. Okay. And these are the ones that you will see. And in fact, as you can have it here, you see that it's math, calculus, and algebra. You can also visualize exactly which is the content for it. As well as I can have this one, and here I will have a get based on all tutorials. I can have a remove all. Okay, so you have the options, and it will be the one we delete. After doing delete, it will simply redirect you again to this page. So this is why it did a get command. Okay. It's basically exactly according to what I did. And what you should have now is to install, first of all, Visual Studio Code. Then you have the part with Angular. You have npm installed, you have Node.js installed, okay, these ones. And you will also need the Postman. It will take a while. And next time for your project, you should think of one of your databases that you want to manage in this way with NoSQL. Let's see. Stop here.